there are going to be so many people that are going to say no to your big idea, your vision, or your dream. But if you put in a lot of work to validate the idea before you go out and do it, and like really spend the time asking the hard questions, you're going to end up making up your own mind based on the data that you're collecting.
That is Andi Cross, today's guest, sharing some of the process around how she brought her big idea to life. It's an incredible story. Andi went from working in corporate America and not knowing how to swim to learning how to swim at 30 years old and organizing a 2-year, 50-plus destination scuba diving expedition, traveling to some of the most remote locations around the planet, all aimed to drive visibility to conservation efforts and positive impact news from around the globe. And she's running this expedition despite not being a trained scientist. We get into that. We also talk about her out-of-the-box approach to her big idea and some of the overarching principles that you can learn to help you forge your next unique path, how she made the leap and swapped the C-suite for scuba gear and some of the lessons learned on that journey, some of her favorite sustainably minded dive destinations around the world, and so much more. A ton in this episode. You're going to love it, and it's happening right now. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey there, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And we practice what we preach here on the show. Speaking of traveling on your own terms, Andi Cross has certainly done that. You can check out her work over at edgesoferarth.com. And I'm just so inspired by this story. There's a ton of actionable takeaways in this one as well. I think that you can apply to your own life, as there often is when you hear about a journey like the one you're going to hear today that Andi went on. And I had to ask her, what exactly is an expedition? How does it make it different from some of the other expedition-like travel missions out there? And it turns out they are typically run by scientists, and I was fascinated and inspired by how she figured out how to carve her own path and get around this. More thoughts on that after the chat, by the way, including my number one takeaway from this conversation. I want to get into it now. First, a last reminder over at zerototravel.com/newsletter. You can sign up for the free weekly newsletter. I write it, goes out once a week. Musings, helpful links, random, who knows what. All the stuff that you love about the podcast, you can get in the newsletter as well, some extra content for you, and it's free once a week. So sign up to keep in touch over there if you haven't done so. For now, please enjoy my conversation with Andi Cross. I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Cheers. Andi Cross, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I have no idea where you are, what time it is. It's sort of dark and there's a little bit of a whispering vibe going on. Is it the middle of the night? Is it early morning? Where are you at?
We are currently in Panama and it is 4:09 a.m. So we're just a little bit behind you. Yeah.
Okay. So that's dedication to come on and promote Edges of the Earth here on Zero to Travel at 4 a.m. I have to give you mad props for that.
Always. It's time zones don't matter on the edges of Earth. We are always somewhere else and always traveling. So we've gotten used to the weird hours.
Yeah. The last I heard, you were in Hawaii. I thought you were going to be in Hawaii when I spoke with you, but maybe that was, miscommunication.
We were in Hawaii. We were in Hawaii when we were first supposed to chat. And then the second time we moved to California. So we were in Hawaii for 4 weeks. We were in California for 2.5. And now we just got here yesterday.
Where's your home base?
So I have two home bases. One is in New York, in Manhattan, and then the other is in Perth, Western Australia. So I am a quintessential global citizen.
Wait, that's quite a few time zones to be splitting time in. Why is that?
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast in America. So Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York. And that is where most of my career and life is currently. And then I moved to Perth, Western Australia about 5 years ago to become a professional scuba diver. So that is where my passion lies.
What part of Philly?
I grew up on the main line, like right outside of it in a place called Broomall. Have you heard of it before?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Bucks County, so...
Oh my gosh, there you go.
I'm a Philadelphia guy. I go to the Mac machine and I hit up the Wawa and I go to Rita's water ice and, the whole thing. So...
Oh, that's amazing. And you watch the Eagles, right?
Absolutely. I also love the Jersey Shore. Speaking of, scuba diving and ocean life, I think like the Jersey Shore has, I know it sounds crazy because there's all these beautiful places in the world and we talk about so many of them here on the show, but the Jersey Shores, I just have, something about where you have fond childhood memories. It's one of those examples of a destination where like, well, the destination's nice and it's fun, but it's maybe not always about the destination itself. It might be just the memories you create there.
Exactly. And the Jersey Shore is near and dear to us Philly kids. I'm similar to you. That's my childhood ocean knowledge and access is the Jersey Shore. So I'm very much in the same camp as you, where there's a lot of fond childhood memories on those beaches. Love them or hate them.
Nice. In the Forbes article I read about you, you said, quote, "I wanted to see if I could successfully become a digital nomad and create a life that I entirely designed, and I desperately wanted to be closer to the ocean." And your former life, let's call it, or maybe it's still your current life as a growth strategist, you help startup scale and enterprise businesses pivot, which is, if I'm going to go meta here, you were kind of taking your own like pivoting mentality and doing your own pivot yourself. Were you kind of like, as you were coaching or consulting with these startups and talking about pivots, was that the thing that was kind of where you're like, maybe I should be utilizing some of these strategies myself? Like, how did those two things intertwine for you?
That's a really nice bridge and jump that you've made because it's exactly what happened. It's funny when you start meeting all of these incredible founders who are like upending the system or radically altering the way in which we think about things and changing the way in which we view the world. You start to think about your own life as well. And I'm sitting in a New York skyrise for 11 years of my career, and it was absolutely amazing. I loved everything about it. It was so cool, and I got such incredible training in New York. But when I started to remember what that passion was, those days at the Jersey Shore where I was wading in ankle deep water and wondering what else is out there, I really hadn't at any time in my life tapped into a passion in any way. And so when I'm watching all these incredible founders, really think through what their next chapters look like and how they're going to leave a legacy and upend things, I had to start thinking about it myself. And I started traveling quite a bit just to get a better understanding of what else is out there. And I started in the States. I started traveling to California. I started traveling to Washington, Oregon, Florida, just trying to get a little bit more understanding of what ocean life looks like here in the USA. And then I also started traveling quite a bit abroad. And in my time abroad, I just kept meeting amazing people and asking them, do you love your life? And what can you share about your unique lifestyle? And I have to say, the Australians sold me. They sold me really good. I met a lot of Australians in my travel, and they talked to me about their world and how connected they were to the ocean. And it was the ultimate selling point when I started to look at a social media account called Perth is Okay. And it's a joke because a lot of people make fun of Perth being one of the most isolated cities in the world and so far away, and nobody goes there, and it's the Wild West. But when you start to actually look at that ocean out there and you start to understand what the options are when you do go to the edges of Earth, It's a pretty special place, especially for someone who's keen to become a scuba diver.
Amazing. So was part of that generating like a self-awareness around the direction your life was going? Because up until that point, you must have been thinking about these things. What do I want to do or anything? But it was, it can be tricky, especially when you're starting out too. You get opportunities and you fall into something and one thing leads to another. And the next thing you're 3 or 4 years into it. Or is it just kind of like going with the opportunities and not kind of thinking too much about, it's like, all right, these are good opportunities, but I don't need to necessarily be merging my other interests into this. Like, was it a gradual thing, or all of a sudden were you just like, oh my gosh, I gotta like do something different, this is insane? Because for some people that process is like a multi-year kind of like, let it stew, let me figure this out. And for others, they just like, it's sort of there, but then it just kind of bubbles up and all of a sudden it explodes. Obviously there's a lot of degrees of that in between, but yeah, I just want to dig into that a little bit more and maybe get your advice for anybody listening that's kind of contemplating a pivot of their own.
Sure, for sure. Some of my friends would say this was a very flash decision. Some of my friends will even say it was for a guy. Some of my friends will say they knew this was coming for a very long time. So it depends on who you talk to in my life. But the truth of it is, when I turned 30, something changed. And I felt like I had built this amazing career in New York and I was loving my job and I was like really getting ahead. And then all of a sudden one day I wasn't. one day I woke up and I was like, I am missing something here, but I don't know what it is. And what the trajectory that got me to asking that really difficult question of like, what's missing here, was I had worked a full-time job my entire life. I started working when I was 13. And I've been working like crazy ever since. And when I was working at a company called Access Worldwide, which was a small agency startup, essentially, that was focused on luxury brands. And all the while, my best friend and I from high school and middle school, we were building a company called Bad Kids. And Bad Kids was an electronic dance music company that sold throwaway merch to those club kids going to festivals and also producing electronic dance music events. And we ran that for about 5 years. And it was amazing. We had the best time ever. And it was very entrepreneurial. We built it from nothing. We saw a lot of success with it. We ended up partnering with SiriusXM, satellite radio provider, and putting on events with them with major mainstream DJs. We were throwing events all over the country. We were selling merch left and right. We had gone viral a few times. Like, it was very special. And when we decided to no longer be club kids, I had fully lost my identity. I was like your quintessential electronic dance music gal. And I loved it. It was a moment. It was a phase. I was in my early 20s. It was really fun. But I felt like, yes, I was working my full-time job all the while. I was working at these big agencies and getting so much knowledge and training and exposure and meeting some of the smartest people in the business. And I was learning so much from them. But I had this identity that was very much mine. And when we stopped that, I was 28. And so from 28 to 30, I felt very lost and confused. And I didn't know who I was anymore. And I didn't have this thing. I missed my best friend. We weren't working together anymore. There was just so many aspects of my life that had changed. And at first I thought it was career. So I was switching jobs a bit. I was working in a lot of, I built up my consulting business at the time. So I was consulting and just starting to get into the impact investing space, which was fascinating. And I liked it. I was working at a digital design company called Huge. And I was loving it because it was such a challenge. But at the same time, it was like, it's not my identity. This like isn't who I am. Like, this isn't who I want to be when I grow up. And I had a lot of mentors at Huge who were taking me and showing me what my future would look like. And I just didn't like it. I did not want to be, a marketer working in this big corporate office. And it's like, this isn't my identity. This isn't who I am. There's something missing. And so when I started traveling, when I turned 30, solo traveling, I started to see some other sides of things. And that's when it really changed. And I met a lot of people, like I mentioned before, along the way who were telling me, you're not just a marketer. You're not just a growth strategist. You're not just an impact investor. These aren't just the things you are. Like, who are you? And I couldn't answer that question. And it really, really hurt. And it was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, I'm 30, 31. I have no idea who I am. Like, this is crazy. Like, I'm not a club kid anymore. That's for sure. I'm not going to clubs. I'm not going to parties. I'm hardly listening to electronic dance music. I'm back to my 90s grunge. So it was very startling to realize I didn't have the answers to those questions. So I started to think, like, who am I and who do I want to be and what do I have to do to get there? And I tapped back to my childhood passion, which was the ocean. When I was a kid, I was fascinated with the sea. I never really spent a lot of time in it aside from the Jersey Shore. And I loved marine mammals. I was super into cetaceans. I loved whales. And so I thought to myself, maybe I quit my day job and become a marine biologist. So I had a radical moment that happened to me. I was starting to research the world of ocean conservation. And I stumbled upon a picture of a polar bear eating trash in Nat Geo. And everything changed. That was like the moment where I was like, okay, I know what I need to do now. No longer my Andi the club kid running bad kids, but I'm going to be Andi, the growth strategist who applies my skills to the ocean. And I'm going to bring back that childhood passion of mine, which was so true and raw and honest and real, my default mode, as I like to call it, and find a way to bridge my truest passion with my profession. I'm not going to quit my day job. I'm not going to, abandon all of these skills that I've gathered over the years in my career field. And I'm going to bring those two things together. And that's what brought me to Australia, because I thought no better way to figure this all out than to become a scuba diver and see all of this for myself and become as knowledgeable as I possibly can with the ocean, to start forging that bridge between passion and profession.
Wow. A moment of clarity from a picture. You never know what's going to kind of be the spark that ignites the flame. And you didn't know how to swim, though. That's kind of a big
no
thing you left out. You're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to become involved with ocean conservation. All this is like, wait a second. All right. Because you learned to swim at 30. And I know this is a big part of your story. Rightfully so, because I think this is a very empowering part for anybody listening that wants to do something. And you could have easily said, well, like, obviously that's ridiculous. Like, I don't even know how to swim. I'm too far behind. Like, I can't even, but you didn't. You learned how to swim and you went for it. And this kind of ties into where I want to go with this, but can you just talk about the process of that? Was that the next sort of logistical kind of practical step, learning how to swim? Was that like step one of the goal?
Yeah. Well, yeah, kind of. I'll tell you the truth because it's quite startling.
It's just you and me here. So, we'll keep it between us.
Yeah, for sure. It was quite traumatic realizing that I didn't know this, because when I was a kid, I got swim lessons. When I was a child, my parents definitely put me in a pool and I learned how to swim at some point. But because I hadn't done it in so long, I actually could not swim a lap in a pool in any capacity. I could tread water. That I could definitely do. I could stay afloat, but getting from point A to point B was quite challenging. And so to become a diver, you kind of have to know how to swim. So when I did my open water training, I did it in a pool. It was a green colored pool in New York. And I did it by myself and I was very scared. And I had a friend of mine who was really pushing me to get into diving. And I kept messaging her and I was like, is this supposed to be this hard? Is it it's hard, right? I'm not crazy. This is really, really hard. And she's like, no, it's so easy. You're going to be fine. I'm like, okay. So I kept going. And I did, so my pool portion I did in New York. And then the second part of my open water, I flew down to the Bahamas by myself. And I asked the hotel's pool staff, the lifeguards, I was like, do you mind showing me how to swim? Because I'm not sure I'm going to pass the second part of this test because I actually can't get from point A to B in this pool. So for about a day, I learned from the lifeguards how to get from point A to B because I only had to swim a single lap in the pool. So that was part one. When then I moved into my open water portion where I actually had to dive in the ocean. The amount of fear that was coursing through this body was so out of control because I didn't have confidence in my ability to actually survive in the water. I somehow managed to, out of like sheer, I guess, fight or flight. And then when I moved to Australia, it was a heavy dose of like truly learning how to do this. And a lot of it just was me getting in the water as much as I possibly could. My now husband's mother, she actually taught me how to properly swim a lap in a pool. So I got some good lessons in the end, and I now can swim. Very, very, very mediocre swimmer, but I can do it. When you have fins and mask on as a diver, it makes things a lot easier than trying to freestyle swim in a pool. So that was really helpful in just like strapping all the gear on my body and going for it. And I would say for those 5 years that I was living in Australia, I was trying to get out diving literally as much as I could. And what I did to overcompensate for the fact that I am a terrible swimmer, even present day, is working with pros constantly. So from the minute I got to Australia till the minute I left on expedition, I have been working with really incredible, amazing scuba divers, free divers, swimmers to help me catch up, essentially. And I was in training for seriously almost 5 years. I don't think there's been like a moment where I haven't had someone there watching and helping and coaching and guiding until I finally became a dive master myself. And now I do it for other people, which is really cool. But it was a long, hard, painful road, I have to say.
Yeah, but your passion for all of this was overriding the pain, I guess. Literally throwing yourself in the deep end here. There are a lot of metaphors here, of course, but I think the idea of like what you said, just getting into the pool every day, whoever's listening now can, whatever their version of getting in the pool every day is, that's something that everybody can apply to their life, I think. What sweet lifeguards, by the way, to just like spend the day with you, and good for you to just, when it comes down to it, those are some of the magical things about travel. Like you can just turn to somebody and be like, hey, in that moment, like, can you help me out here? Like, I just don't know. And they just spent the time with you and did that. Like, what a beautiful thing.
It was so cool. And this is the thing that I've learned. And I say this all the time on travel. If you don't ask, you just don't know. And you also have to give into beginner mindset. Like I had to swallow my pride so many times, be like, I am 30 plus. And I know that this is crazy, but I need you to just help me. And especially moving to Australia, like accepting that I just don't know anything about the ocean and I don't know anything about how to navigate it successfully, and like truly embracing that I'm a beginner is one of the hardest things to do at my age, but also one of the best because you learn to find your people, find help and accept help. And also then in your future, become the one who's very willing to help. So now when I see beginner divers or people are like really nervous about getting in, I'm like, this is my sweet spot. I know exactly what you feel. And if there's any concern, nerve, fear, question, you can literally look at me and be like, okay, if she can do it, then I definitely can, because that girl actually could not swim a lap in a pool before this all began. So it's nice to give it back.
I was just thinking as you were telling the story, thinking back to what you said before about coming off of Bad Kids and struggling with the identity piece, which, by the way, what a great name for a company, Bad Kids.
Yeah, we were bad kids.
A killer company name. Yeah, I want to hear more about the bad things you did. But no, the part of the process of, it could be maybe even a big part of the process of pivoting to a whole different life, let's say, or lifestyle, or like you have, right? You went from like this club kid kind of thing, and now you're wanting to be near the ocean and do all this. Part of that, to me, might be just from a mindset perspective, giving yourself permission to embrace a new identity.
Yeah, very much so. It's funny, you don't think identity matters when you're younger because you're with all your friends and you're just trying to figure it out and you're kind of just going through the motions, right? You're more concerned about what everyone else thinks than what you think. And then all of a sudden you hit 30 and you're like, wait, what do I think? Like, I've been following a lot of this status quo, and I'm not sure everyone can relate to this, but certainly us Philly kids, when we're growing up, we're told that New York is the Mecca, and New York is where you need to be successful, or you need to be in center city Philly, or you need to be like in these big cities moving and grooving. And like, that was the world that I grew up with. Everyone telling me that New York was the end all be all. And so I went to New York and I thought New York was the end all be all. And everyone told me that I needed to be a marketer because my personality was so in line with the marketing persona. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be a marketer. Like, none of this was really a choice of my own. It was what I was told I was supposed to do. So I did it. And then when Bad Kids came around and we were doing something really different, and we were really building a community, and we were finding so many people who were saying to us, I never felt like I fit in before, but here in this community, I do, because you're letting me be, you're helping me find my identity and to be my truest self, or to, tap into my passion, or to just like be my weirdest version. And something about that was so incredible to hear so many people who felt like they didn't belong, or they didn't fit in, or they didn't feel like they had a home until they found Bad Kids. And for me, that was so true. Like, I never really felt like I fit in, and never really felt like I was, part of any groups in high school, or I never really like had this personality that I crafted for my own self. And so for me, going to Australia and becoming a scuba diver and doing this like wild thing that everyone in my life was like, what's wrong with you? Like, you've built this incredible career in New York. You've done all these things. Like, why would you leave that all behind or give that up? For me, I was like, sick. This is my moment. Like, this is my moment to like truly, like you said in the Forbes article, that direct quote, like design my own life with nobody giving me feedback as to what I'm supposed to do. In fact, everyone is telling me I'm crazy. So this is perfect, because this is my opportunity to really ask myself, who am I, and who do I want to be, and what is my most authentic truth, and go and run with it. And it's really scary to look at yourself in the mirror. I mean, I like actually literally sobbed looking at myself in the mirror, being like, identity really matters, and you just don't have one, and like, you don't have your thing, and like you're super into your career, and that's great and that's awesome, but there's so much more to life than that, and you need to go figure that out now before you are much older and you're having like a really crazy crisis and other people are involved. Because right now this is just me. I don't have kids. I don't have any obligations. At the time, I didn't have a partner. And it was a lot easier to upend an entire life because I wasn't radically upending anyone else's.
Yeah, right. When people say you're crazy, I think on this show, that's always a good sign that you're on the right path.
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
I don't know about other podcasts, but I know in this podcast, it feels like, I've heard that from other guests, is like, you're crazy. And it's like, if you're listening and that's happening in your life right now, maybe you're onto something. Maybe you're on the right track.
Exactly. It's like the Larry Ellison quote, the CEO of Oracle. He says, when everyone's telling you you're crazy, you might be onto the greatest innovation of your life. And I could not agree more. Yeah.
See, that's why he's a billionaire and I'm just a podcaster, because he could say it much more eloquently than I can. No. Well, it can be very empowering to say to yourself, I'm a scuba diver, even if you can't swim, even if you haven't ever scuba dived in your life, or whatever, like insert whatever version of that you're listening. I remember going into a guitar shop at, I don't know, 24 or 25 years old and getting my first guitar and thinking I'm probably too old to play the guitar, and all this self-talk of like, who am I? I don't even know how am I going to even buy a guitar? I don't even know how to play anything. How am I going to know what's a good one or how it sounds good? And, if I just had like, sometimes you have to fake it till you make it to yourself. I think that's one of the most empowering things you can do. You can just be like, you know what? I don't even own a guitar, but I love music. I'm a musician. Like, I'm going to be a musician. And that's just what I am right now. That over time took some time for me personally in my journey with music specifically to just kind of embrace, okay, like I'm a songwriter. And does that mean I have to be a Grammy award winning songwriter or, have to be in the cover of magazines? No, like I can be in my little loft here, just writing songs and be a songwriter. But if I didn't really start finishing songs or embracing that until I actually just said to myself, I'm a songwriter. Whether the songs suck or not doesn't matter. It's so important to tell yourself, I am this thing. But also at the same time, I do think it's important to not get too attached to identities. How do you feel about that?
Well, this is exactly what had happened. I got so attached to the club kid identity and bad kids that I totally lost myself when it was done. And it was the worst feeling in the world to be like, oh my God, what's next? You can't be so pigeonholed, right? And so you have, in my opinion, you have to be multifaceted and you have to love a lot of things. You have to be a lot of things. And, when you are just one thing and then that changes and you'll feel this like devastation beyond imaginable. So how do you prevent that from happening? And that's actually a really good point that you bring up, and something that I contemplated quite heavily in moving to Australia. It's like, okay, I need an identity, but I can't do what I just did again. I can't anchor my whole life to just this one thing. I can't just be Andi runs bad kids and the club kid. I have to be Andi who's a growth marketer. That's part of my identity. Andi who's a scuba diver. That's part of my identity. Andi who's a partner. That's part of my identity. Andi who loves cats a lot. That's part of my identity. Like, you know what I mean? There's got to be other things that are the full picture. And to think that just one facet of your life is who you are is a problem, in my opinion. I want to be a good partner. I want to be a good mother one day. I want to be a good scuba diver. I want to be a good career person. Like I want to have a good career. All of these things make up an identity, and it's not just one lever. It's many levers. And so in my quest to moving to Australia, it wasn't just about, I want to become the best scuba diver ever, and that's all I'm going to do, and that's all I'm going to focus on. I wanted to build my own business wholly and truly. I wanted to become a horse rider because I used to ride horses as a kid. I was riding horses when I moved to Australia 5 days a week. I wanted to get better at lifting weights. I wanted to, there's all these things that I wanted to do. And I wanted to do them because they're all part of my identity and not just a single lane. So when people ask, what are you? I like to define myself as an adventure seeker, which then allows me to be lots of things and many, many different verticals. And I have venture seeking in career and personal life and professional life. So, and my passion. So I'm very much with you. You can't get anchored to just one thing. You have to realize that you're a multifaceted person and there's all these different sides of you. And knowing who you are across all of those sides is really important. And it will change with time. It's never ending quest.
That's true. Yeah. If you're open, then you're also leaving room for change and awareness around, if there's some level of detachment in a way. Let's say you're embracing something, but you're not holding it tight, right? In terms of an identity or something you want to do. And then I think that you're right. Like it leaves room for accepting the change that naturally occurs, because at some point, you might not be interested in X, Y, or Z thing. And if you have an awareness around that, it's like, it's okay to let it go and kind of move on to the next thing. Like, it's okay if you stop liking riding horses. You're like, maybe I had my fill with horses. I don't know if that's true for you, but you know what I mean? I'm using the horses thing as an example. Yeah. Some flexibility, I think. It doesn't necessarily make you any less of who you are. It doesn't steal any of your identity. It just, maybe it keeps you open.
Exactly.
I think it's important.
Exactly. I agree. I'm right there with you.
Edges of Earth Expedition is a 2-year, 50-plus destination diving expedition traveling to some of the most remote locations around the planet. And you're aiming to drive visibility to conservation efforts and positive impact news from around the globe. So I want to dig into this because, first of all, I know this is going to sound like a stupid question, but there's no such thing as stupid questions here on the podcast. But what is an expedition? Like, how is it different from a regular trip?
Really good question, actually. Amazing question. One of the better questions asked, because a lot of people actually don't ask and then don't know. So a vacation, I'll break it down in a couple different ways. A vacation is when you go to a place and you are relaxing, unwinding, disconnecting, trying something new. You're just there for your own personal benefit, right? You're going on vacation for you. Then when you go traveling, you're going on vacation or you're going on a trip to expand your mind and to possibly do a little bit more than just for you. Maybe you're doing some community service, volunteer work. I don't know. Traveling is a chance for you to really broaden the mindset and try new things and push yourself, etc. You're not necessarily just going to rest, recharge, unwind. And adventure is when you're doing something radically crazy and you're going to go do something that like steps you far out of your comfort zone. For some people, that's walking a great distance. For other people, that's jumping off a cliff. For other people, that's diving to deep depths. Then there's an expedition. An expedition is where you are traveling for the sake of increasing human knowledge on a topic, where you are collecting data, you are gathering insights that will then culminate in a thing, whether that's a report, a study, a research paper, a thesis, and you name it. There's something that comes out of it at the end that is meant to elevate human knowledge on the natural world or on the deepest depths or on a species or an organism on a thing. And so what makes our journey a little different than an adventure or traveling or vacation is that we're actually developing a thing that is meant to be used in study for us to further our knowledge on ocean conservation, restoration, science, discovery.
Yeah, I love the breakdown. Beautiful breakdown. What does that greater sense of purpose mean for you when it comes to this trip this expedition you've designed?
It's interesting. When it first started, the idea was simply to just tell stories, to help amplify people's stories on the edges of Earth who don't necessarily have access to amplifying their stories in any way. What it's turned into is an actual study on human appetite, human behavior when it comes to conserving, protecting, restoring our natural world. And we are meeting so many people around the world who have given up everything, dedicated their whole lives, have built their entire identities around ocean, whether they were born that way or they found their way into it. These ocean people, as I like to call them, are like your heart and soul of the blue planet. And they're the reason why we have these incredible places to dive, explore, vacation, travel, experience, adventure. And so when we're meeting these people, they're giving us this incredible insight into their world, into their why, into their how. And we're documenting that quite rigorously to then at the end of our 2-year expedition, produce 2 reports, one on the consumer side and one on the business side to say, hey, we visited every continent. We've traveled 150 locations now. It's expanded. And we've gone to all of these incredible corners to only learn the same things are recurring in each of these places. What does that mean for consumers and how we can change our behavior? And what does that mean for businesses and how we can change the way in which we operate so that we can better serve not just the ocean people, but the ocean ecosystems and the ocean species that really depend on all of our choices.
I do want to pull another quote from that Forbes article where you said, because I think this is an important point, ties in with a lot of stuff that we've discovered already. You said for the longest time, the narrative was that you had to be a scientist or a researcher to get involved in ocean conservation. You know, again, I think people listening can apply that to X, Y, or Z and whatever there is going on in their own life. And this comes back to maybe choosing yourself, the idea of choosing yourself and just kind of like diving in, so to speak. Sorry for the pun. Being willing to not accept something on the surface, or being willing to kind of break through a limiting belief, let's say, because that is sort of the perception, right? In the work that you're doing, you would think that, okay, well, yeah, this is something that scientists do, but you've found there are a lot of ways to contribute. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to highlight here. You're contributing in a way that first you wanted to tell the stories, but now it's morphed into something else, as expeditions and travel generally does. Can you just talk about the process of finding your place within the expedition framework and how that's been, and just any advice you could share for anybody else interested in kind of getting involved with something that's bigger than them?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. this is a really good topic that you bring up, and probably one of my favorites to talk about, because when I first started into this, this is like beginner mindset to the max. I am not an explorer. I've never gone on an expedition before. I'm like at pure square 1 or 0, or I'm nothing, right? And so my approach was to start finding other explorers who had done this before. And a lot of the explorers that I were meeting were much older than me and had decades of experience. I'm talking 50, 60, even 70 years in the field, dedicating their lives to the art of exploration. And a lot of them would say to me, well, you're not a scientist and you're not a researcher, so you actually don't have a place in this sector. And it was very extraordinarily disheartening. And a lot of people would say, this has been done a million times before. This isn't going to contribute in any way. You don't need to do this. And originally, some of my first ideas for the expedition were about mapping the dive destinations that I was going to and better understanding what once was there and what is now there, and looking at that change, which a lot of that has been done. But for me, my view was, okay, even if it had been done 30 years ago, it's not being done right now. So let's just keep going. This is just advancing. No matter what, any of this data pull is advancing human knowledge, in my opinion. They're like, well, you're not a trained scientist, so you can't do it. And that was 2021, from April 2021, when I had the idea to go on expedition, all the way through to April 2022. That was the narrative. Everyone I was meeting was telling me that. And I was meeting a lot of people through LinkedIn. I'm a creep. I'm a good old fashioned cold outreach weirdo that just sends you a note and it's like, hey, I know you don't know me in any way, but I'm going to reach out to you, because if you don't ask, you'll never know, right? I'm a big fan of just going for it, regardless of how foolish or weird or strange I might look. And so when I joined the Explorers Club, which is a 125-year-old membership club that you have to get into, you have to apply. I finally got in, and I actually hadn't tapped into that network very much, because I hardly got in. I got in because I helped write one paper once on some shark work, and they let me in because I actually applied 10 times. So they were finally like, okay, she's a psycho, she'll let this girl in.
You can't mess with a Philly girl, you know?
No, when people tell me no, it's very hard for me to hear that. So it was just a lot of applying. And finally I met someone within the Explorers Club who was a Philly guy too. We were born on the exact same day in the exact same hospital.
Wow.
In the exact same, pretty crazy.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was really wild. So he and I bonded over our obvious similarities, and he gave me a chance. He gave me a good old fashioned chance, and he connected me to a lot of people within the club who he said would really be able to help me. And the reason why he and I were, besides us having the same birthday and being from the same place and basically being the same person, he could understand how the work that I do in growth strategy can really help people on the edges of Earth, and could really help explorers as well share their message, because so many of these incredible explorers, they've never had to communicate their stories, or that's not what their core is. Their core is collecting that data and gathering those insights and asking those really hard questions about our natural world. But they don't have people helping them share those stories or communicate their message, or take all of that complex data that they've collected and dumb it down for people like me to process, right? So Kevin could see the why, he could see the why and the how, and he connected me to a lot of people. I mean, hundreds of people. And that's what started it all, because then I started to meet progressive thinkers in the space of exploration who, now the narrative was totally different. It was, oh my God, this is amazing. Go out there and do it. This hasn't been done before. You're thinking about this really differently than we would have. And a lot of imparted wisdom. I mean, there were some people who had been in the field for 60 years who were sitting with me for 4 or 5 hours telling me everything, how to run an expedition, what to do, what not to do, what to make sure that I wear shoes at all times in the Solomon Islands so I don't get cuts on my feet, like crazy, like down to the country details of, how to do this. And I was so appreciative at the amount of time everyone was spending with me and the amount of trust and belief they had in the vision. So from 2022 into 2023, that year of just meeting so many people, it was almost like a no-brainer to go and do this thing. But to answer your question in this very long-winded and rambly way, the amount of no that I heard to start around not being a scientist was quite severe. And then the amount of yeses I heard about not being a scientist was quite extreme. And so the point that I'm trying to make is there are going to be so many people that are going to say no to your big idea, your vision, or your dream. But if you put in a lot of work to validate the idea before you go out and do it, and like really spend the time asking the hard questions, you're going to end up making up your own mind based on the data that you're collecting. And by the end, the data that I had collected was an overwhelming, outstanding, you have no choice but to go and do this now, because so many people were championing it. And to this day, that's what it's been. So ever since I got in with the right people who inspired me to just push past the naysayers and just really go for it, and here's all the reasons why, I started to really understand that you do not have to be a scientist or a researcher in any capacity to go on a global expedition. But what you do need is an idea, a lot of research, a disgusting amount of research, a lot of time spent, and you have to validate your idea. And this is the same principles that we apply in growth strategy on startups. If you're a startup founder and you have an idea, you have to go through testing and validation and asking the hard questions and iterations and chapter changes and pivots and modifications and all these things. You have to be okay with constantly evolving and constantly flexing. So what the idea was for Edges of Earth back in 2021 is nowhere near what the idea for Edges of Earth is today. It's so different, but that's because we've put in the time to really ask these hard questions, shape it, get insight, get perspective, and also just go out and do it. And as we've gone out and done it, we've learned what works, what doesn't, et cetera, and been able to really craft it the way we think is right. And not because we're scientists or researchers, based on the skills that we have that we're uniquely providing to the world of exploration.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. Shout out to Kevin, by the way, for connecting you with all
Kevin's
those people,
the man.
Right?
Yeah.
It's
Kevin's
nice if
the
you
man.
can get to the point where you meet that one person that really gets behind you and helps out. And also, if you have the opportunity to be that person for somebody else, it's a nice thing to pay forward, because it does circle back, I think. Is this still self-funded?
Yes, it is still self-funded.
Okay, because this is another, of course, people are like, how are you paying for all this? Was this just about, let me take all the money I earned with my hard work and put it to use on this project? Is that kind of how it worked out?
Kind of.
Okay.
Yeah, we've tried not to put all of our money, all of it in. It's definitely been interesting, because most of the time when you go on an expedition, you get the funding from somewhere, whether that's a big corporate or a grant or an ultra high net worth donor, or I don't know where else people get money, but a lot of the time you quit your day job or you don't have a day job and this is what you do, and you are funded by someone else. And I had been working with a lot of nonprofits as part of the consulting business that I've been building when I moved to Australia. And I did not like that model at all. I do not like asking people for money. I do not like owing people money. I don't like loans. I don't like grants. I don't like having to prove myself to then, have someone give me something. I like it to be an equal value exchange. So if I produce something for someone and they pay me for my work, perfect. That's always been the way I've done things. So for me, I wanted to not quit my day job and continue my day job, because I actually really like my day job. My day job is something that I've spent my whole life trying to understand and build and create. So I didn't want to give up all of the consulting and the growth strategy work that I was doing for companies that I actually really like working with. So that's the consulting business that then funds the expedition. And so we have not applied for grants. We have not received, any sort of donation. We're not a nonprofit. We're a for-profit expedition team, and we're a for-profit consulting business. And we have clients that we work for, and we trade our skills and we produce work for them, and they pay us for that work. So it's been a really different approach. And people are like, you're crazy. You run a full-time expedition and you run a full-time consulting business. And let me tell you, there are days where I'm like, oh my God.
Like today, you're getting up at 4 a.m. to talk to me for some reason, you know what I mean?
4 a.m. is nothing. Try 2 a.m. When we're on calls talking about, God knows what, but it's a lot. But again, when you start seeing what the contribution can do for other people and what it can do for the planet, it's quite motivating to get up at 4 a.m. and do just about anything for this cause. So yeah, it's been a labor of love. I will certainly tell you that.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear how many sort of, let's call them traditional rules that you're breaking in the expedition world. It sounds like, when people like not seeing the vision. And I mean, there's always room for disruption, right? Isn't that what startup world is all about? And you can be the disruptor even in a world that seems so established. And so, like you said, I think expedition, I think funding and National Geographic and scientists and all of this. And this is totally different from that, which is, I think, a for-profit company, and you're working remotely. And I just think it's amazing and so inspiring. What would be the dream scenario for you, like coming out of this expedition, and you could say, oh my gosh, look at what we did. We did this, that, and that. Like, what are those things? What would be the sort of the ultimate for you to look back on this in terms of success? What does success mean for this expedition, I guess?
That is the $1 million question. So what I would have said in 2021 and what I say now is so different. It's crazy. What I hoped coming out of 2021 was that we could just keep telling stories from the edges of Earth, right? Like, we could just keep helping people share their message. Today, it is much different. And it's really about blending the consulting business and the expedition and making them one. And so a lot of the insights that we're gathering from the edges of Earth, we want to be able to apply back to the companies that we work for. So what I mean by that is very much around companies' ESG strategies, or their, worldly contributions, or how companies build around doing good and doing well. And we've had quite a few companies that we're working with now that are like really starting to get into that space, which is awesome. And it's very, very cool to see on the startup side. But we want to figure out how to apply that on the enterprise level as well. So really consulting with big businesses to help them with their ESG strategy and what that looks like and what that means in the modern world. That's goal one. That's what we hope to achieve. Then goal two, for as much as we love expedition life and being out on the road for 2 years back to back, it is not a sustainable future. I will tell you that right now, for a lot of reasons, right? Like, it's so hard to travel on a good day, and the places that we're going, like, times that by 20, how hard it is to get to some of these places and how exhausting it is. And it's so amazing to have these experiences, but we definitely need a home base. That's going to be a really big one for us. And we also we want to go on strike missions. So we have a home base and we go to a location and we stay there for an extended period of time. And then we come right back home. Staying on the road forever and ever is not viable for anyone. It definitely is. It's a lot. And it's been really nice to know that there's an end date, because then we can really push hard in these 2 years. And then the mission, the desires to go on these strike missions from our home base. And the other thing that I will say, and this is something that I never thought I'd say in a million years, but I think this is so important to understand, is there's so much to explore in your own backyard. And a lot of what I've learned traveling the edges of Earth is there's these incredible people who've committed to their home and said, I am going to help where I'm from or where I've chosen to live. And I'm going to put all of my effort, time, energy into this community. And there's something to be said about that. I never fully understood that. I never felt that much of a close connection to my home. I never really thought, I'm a Philly girl. Like I never really embraced what that meant. But there's a lot of validation and a lot of importance to, being true to your roots or being true to a place that you want to call home and giving back to that community. So I think for us, as we end up choosing where our home base will be, which will be a total choice of our own, and not because someone told us to go there, we want to contribute to where we are going to land. And what does that look like? Unsure. But that is going to be a really big next step coming out of all of this. So we've been having a lot of talks about what does home mean to us and where do we want that to be. I'm on the road right now with my husband, who I met while traveling. And he and I have lots and lots and lots of talks about what that means to us. And it's been really fun to see the world as our oyster, but also to recognize that there's something really powerful about calling somewhere home.
We quoted you earlier. You wanted to try the digital nomad lifestyle. You wanted to do the nomad thing. And, having the sort of the 2-year time frame. Yes. I mean, these lessons or these thoughts, you've discovered them because you've been nomadic and you've been traveling around. So it's, sometimes you have to be the nomad to want to live somewhere sometimes. That's just the way it goes. You mentioned ESG a couple times. Can you just tell everybody what that acronym stands for?
Yeah. So companies are thinking about their internal strategies for how they govern their business, how they think about environment, they think about social aspects, they think about how they're governing the company. And this is really important because it's a holistic strategy. It's a total picture strategy. It's not just thinking about a single part. Are we going to be better at waste management? No, it's about a total collective vision for how the company is going to be run across environment, social, and governing practices. And so the reason why I like ESG quite a bit is because it requires the entire company to have a mindset shift around how we're treating our people, how we're treating our customers, how we're treating third parties, but also how we're, really factoring in some of these really critical, heavy-hitting, sustainable topics, and also how we're running the company, how we're actually setting the company up to enable that type of mindset to be embedded throughout the entire organization. So that's the principle of it. I'll read you the exact definition, so you can have that. In today's global arena, setting an environmental, social, and governance (ESG) strategy is seen as an important benchmark for how responsible organizations operate. A successful ESG strategy covers 3 main pillars of sustainability: environment, social, and governance. So it's a very, very important way of thinking about how a business runs, and a relatively newer model in the scheme of things. So as a growth strategist, instead of just thinking about how are we going to tell our story, or how are we going to market our company, or how are we going to attract new customers or amplify a certain aspect of the organization, it's thinking about the total picture and how the company operates just as much as how the company communicates.
Great. Thank you. Can we talk about some destinations? Did you bring a list for us today?
I have the list right up here. I will rattle it off to the best of my memory.
The expedition is called Edges of Earth. So maybe you should explain what that means to you. I mean, getting off the beaten path certainly sounds like a big theme for that. And I had noticed in a recent Travel Trends article that the number 2 trend was eco diving, according to this article. I'm not sure if you call what you're doing eco diving. I think a lot of this and your mission here is how travelers can choose their travel destinations based on the sustainability of the scuba centers, trying to kind of merge these worlds of travel and sustainability and conservation. So I'm assuming maybe this list is a bit infused with those principles, but we did ask for you to share your top 5 dive spots around the world. And correct me if I'm wrong, but do you want to give us a little breakdown on how you put together this list and give us some of your favorite places to go and snorkel or scuba dive or just be near the ocean if you're not into any of that?
Yep, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this short because this is a crazy one. Building a 2-year global expedition around the world based on dive destinations is bloody hard. And I did not realize how hard it was until I started doing it. And there were so many nights where I would say to Adam, I'm like, I don't think I can plan this. I love planning. I'm like the biggest planner there ever was. I always have been, always will be. And this has been brutal. It's you have to plan everything with a couple different lenses. One, what are you trying to go and see? So are you trying to see something specific? Is there some story that you're, for me, it's a story that I'm going after, or is it a thing that's happening in the world? So when I was first planning this, it was all around the marine aggregations. So thinking about where animals congregate in mass, where are the giant cuttlefish mating, and where can I see all of these animals interacting with one another? Where can we see the devil rays in, thousands and not just singles? And so with any type, I figured with any big aggregation, there would have to be someone on the sidelines on land studying what the hell is happening out here. And so that was the original plan. And then the next layer is seasons, because you're not going to go to certain places when it's monsoon season. There's just no way to dive that. So you have to plan everything based on aggregation and then the right season for it. And then the next thing that you need to plan is where's their eco tour operators or eco establishments or eco fill in the blank, right? Eco accommodation, eco dive operators, places where you can do this in the most sustainable way, because travel by nature is unsustainable. When you're getting on a plane or you're creating emissions, like you really need to understand how you're offsetting them. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but it's quite challenging. So if you're going to go on a 2-year global expedition, you're going to travel all around the world, then what you're doing when you're in the places that you're going really actually matters a lot more than you think, because you need to not only try to offset as much of your emissions as possible, but also do the right thing when you're actually in the location, especially if you're going tribal or native or local and you're visiting communities that really depend on your tourism dollars or really depend on keeping their natural world as protected and safe as possible. It's important to understand the nuances of going to certain places and understanding the history and what's happened there, understand what's currently going on today, and looking to the future as to, what will your presence actually mean in the long run? So there's a lot to consider when you're planning something like this. And then the next piece is, okay, what if it rains out? What if the weather's poor when we're there? What's our backup plan, and how do we navigate this? So that's the complexities of planning an expedition, then especially multi-year. And then the next piece that comes into play is, who are you meeting along the way, and how are those meetings going to upend your choices and your decisions? So as we started moving on this expedition, we were meeting so many amazing people who were giving us insights into completely new places we never even considered, which would then enable us to reroute or rechart everything. So it's been very interesting laying out the foundations. It's the question or the piece about eco diving. Diving is actually not that sustainable as well, right? You have a lot of divers that get in the water and have learned by part of their training to kneel on the seafloor. That is how they learned how to scuba dive. I'm one of them. I learned how to scuba dive by training on my knees. And when you do that, you're destroying an ecosystem. Like even if it's a sandy bottom, there are creatures that live in that sandy bottom, and you're upending it by being there. So eco diving is really about understanding how to be the best possible diver you can be, which is not always achievable. Sometimes no matter how good of a diver you are, the conditions are crazy and you will run into something, or you will disrupt an ecosystem by just being there. And so an eco diver is really someone who is trying to think about how to minimize the impact of being in the water while exploring the natural world. And then eco dive operators are teams that really put a focus on best practices in diving, really making sure that we understand the ecosystems that we're about to go explore, and helping us understand how to navigate these interesting and unique and remote places that only a few people on Earth know how to explore effectively and correctly because they've spent their whole lives doing it. So when we go to a new place, we can't say that even though we dive all the time, we are nowhere near the experts. We are not the expert divers when we go to a new location because we've never been there before, and we really need to rely on local expertise to help us. So all that being said, there's a lot of considerations that go into doing this, and there's a lot of people that you have to find throughout your journey who really are the pros. And when you get on site, you listen, you absorb, you learn, you ask questions, and you take it all in.
Where are the places people should go?
Well, it's a hard one because it really depends on what you're into. Everywhere we've been has been amazing. And to answer your question about what it means to be on the edges of Earth, when we first started this back in 2021, the vision of Edges of Earth was the most remote places on the planet. But Edges of Earth to us now means going to places that you wouldn't expect having some sort of really, really incredible story around ocean conservation, restoration, and protection. So an edge of Earth for us has been Hong Kong. A lot of people would not think that's the edges of Earth. It's a gigantic, massive epicenter, and it's huge. But what you don't know is how much work is going in to protect the shellfish reefs that line this incredible city. And so Edges of Earth for us just means being very open to exploration and getting outside, regardless of where you are in the world, and going to find that really interesting and unique ocean story or ocean people, as we like to call them, right there in your own backyard. So for me, my favorite places have been Australia, of course. That's where we're trending as calling home. South Australia was probably one of the coolest dive experiences I've had to date. We dove with great white sharks, gigantic cuttlefish, leafy sea dragons, the endangered Australian sea lions, and the water was so cold. It's considered temperate water, but it sure did not feel it. We dove in 7 mil wetsuits, and it was 13 degrees Celsius. So it was very, very cold. But the amount of life, the water clarity, the remoteness, it was just so raw and so special and such challenging dive conditions because we were diving through a stormy season. It was very, very cool. For more comfortable diving and for more warmer water, the Philippines was unreal. We had some of the best marine encounters in the Philippines. We were there for a month, and I honestly think we could have stayed for a year. It was so incredible. And then here in the USA, on the Western Hemisphere, California scuba diving is some of my favorite in the world. Right off of Central Cali on the Catalina Island. And in the Channel Islands has some of the best kelp forests, and it's so beautiful. And there's so much conservation and restoration and science happening out there. We met some of the most amazing people in Cali. And then, of course, there's the good old Southeast Asia routes where the diving is just some next level stuff. But you definitely have to make sure you choose who you go diving with really carefully because there's a lot of options out there. There's so many people bringing diving into those communities, and it's becoming a very big tourist hub. So definitely need to choose wisely. And that's true of any of the locations I've just described. But Southeast Asia has some of the most incredible diving on the planet. So people from all over the world are flocking to experience it. And I know my number one favorite dive destination will be in Indonesia and Raja Ampat. That was supposed to be one of our first stops on expedition, but I was very severely injured before taking off, so we had to move it to the very, very end. So Raja Ampat in Indonesia will be our grand finale, and it's one of the sites I'm most excited for.
Amazing list. Thanks for sharing.
Of course.
What are the biggest lessons you've learned so far on the consumer and business side? You mentioned that being a focus of the expedition.
I'm going to try to articulate this as simply as I possibly can because there's so many insights that we've gathered, and it's been really, really an insightful and eye-opening experience. But the summary of it all is this is a two-way street. If we think the pressure is just on the consumer to change. It isn't. It's on the business as well. If we think that the pressure is just on the businesses to change, that's incorrect as well. It's on the consumer. And there's so many other players that go into making change: governments, policymakers, financial institutions, the list goes on, right? There's so much. This space is so complicated, and there's so many different layers to it. But when we're just talking about consumers and businesses, we have to work together here. Consumers need to demand better choices for ourselves, right? Like, we don't have a lot of options right now to contribute sustainably and live in this modern world that we've created. So we need to say, okay, we want to upend single-use plastic. We want to wear recycled clothing. We want to stop buying so much and, really just appreciate some of the things that we have, and function versus, need. We have to move away from need to just I need and want to, this is what I have, and I'm going to work with this. But this consumeristic mindset of ours is quite challenging because it's causing quite a bit of disruption around the world. And on the other side, businesses need to hear that call and create options for us that are just better. So there needs to be consumer demand, and there needs to be business action, and then there needs to be business desire to actually create products that and services that are just more sustainable and are addressing these planetary issues that are screaming at us in the face, right? So my point is, we as consumers need to demand that we want a different world, and we want different things, and we have different priorities, and we have different desires, needs, wants. And then businesses need to actually want to make that change and realize that doing good is also profitable. So I like to say doing good and doing well can go hand in hand for an organization. We don't have to create, plastic products and have that be the norm anymore. There are a lot of different alternatives that we can use to plastic that will create a really great product. We don't have to buy clothing that is right off of the shelf. We can go buy secondhand used clothing and have it be just as great as the stuff that we're buying right off the shelf. We can wear our products longer. We can use our products longer. We don't need all of these things. And something that I've learned very firsthand is when you sell all of your belongings and you get rid of your apartment and you go live out of a couple suitcases around the world, you start realizing that you just don't need so many things to be happy. In fact, I'd argue that I've never been happier having so little. It's just a big eye opener. So there's work to do on the consumer side where we can demand certain things change. And there are a lot of ways that we can push on that. We can say, we're only going to stay at eco properties that, are run by solar and have really good waste management systems. And we're not going to use single-use plastics. And there's a lot of things we can do there. And then the businesses need to start providing us options that better enable us to do that. So instead of fast food restaurants using plastic straws, these are tiny examples that I'm giving here, but just trying to contextualize it a bit. Instead of, fast food restaurants using plastic straws, they can use seaweed-based straws. And we know a lot of companies that are creating those products that are just as good as the plastic straw. And they are compostable and biodegradable and are made out of seaweed. So there's lots of different ways that we can contribute on both sides. And we need to meet each other in the middle and deliver together and not expect one side to do all the work or the other side to do all the work. So that's the crux of it. And then the other piece for us, and all of our storytelling is very positive. We're sharing uplifting stories from the edges of Earth. We're sharing the wins, the positive progress, the good stuff that's happening. And the reason why we're doing that is because if a country or a location or a group of people have figured out how to do something right and good, and it's working in their community, why can't we apply that elsewhere? So we're pulling a lot of case studies from the edges of Earth to say, hey, if this worked in location X, maybe it can work in location Y because of similar characteristics in that location. So there's quite a few big insights that we're gathering that we're hopeful can work across both consumer, business, and in the scientific and research world as well.
And the best way for people to get in touch and stay in touch, edgesoferarth.com, is that where you'd send everybody?
edgesoferarth.com. That's where it's at. That's our website. We try to update it as much as we can. That's where it's at. We also have a newsletter on LinkedIn.
Okay. Yeah, we can link up to that in the show notes. If you'll give us the link to that, that'd be great. Just a couple more quick questions. What is the best way for people to get involved with ocean conservation? Just somebody that's at home listening to this.
Well, if it's someone who is like me, who had no exposure to the ocean or ocean conservation, the best thing that you can do is go get in the ocean and go see for yourself. I think that's a big piece of advice we've actually heard all around the planet when we ask people that question. You got to see it to believe it, right? And you have to love it to want to protect it. So if you just get in and experience it yourself, something might unlock for you. If you are not someone who wants to get in the ocean, this is my personal opinion, the best thing you can do is go find a lot of people who do this all day and reach out to them. Do that weird cold outreach thing I was talking about on LinkedIn. You never know who's going to say yes to you and absolutely upend the rest of your life. So I've had that experience personally quite a few times now. And I am a firm believer in just putting yourself out there and giving it a go. So if there's a nonprofit you really love and you want to work with, or if there's a research team you want to volunteer your time and get some experience and exposure to. And if you're not someone who's going to do that, there's another option for you, and that's on the travel side. Go to a location that you're really interested in, and instead of going on vacation, be a traveler and start figuring out how you can apply your skills, your expertise, or even just your time and energy to causes that really matter. So if you want to go to the Philippines, like I was mentioning before, you can reach out to Marine Conservation Philippines, and they are a team that accepts volunteers and uses their time, effort, and energy to work on projects that are really important to the Philippine region. So you can just get involved by simply volunteering. And you can do that for a week. You can do that for 3 weeks. You can do that for 3 years if you want. So there's a lot of options to get involved on the ground like that if you are more interested in the travel side of things. And then, of course, if that's not interest to you, or that's not an option, and you're still just going to go about your everyday, maybe just make some slight tweaks and changes to your choices. Maybe not buy as many single-use plastic bottles. Maybe move all to reusable items. Maybe instead of using regular sunscreen, use reef-safe sunscreen, and just do a little bit of research on how you can make slight changes that will help in the long run.
The cold outreach you mentioned, I want to get your advice. It sounds like something you do very well. If somebody's hearing that term for the first time, that just means sending a message to somebody who doesn't know you and that you don't know. Can you give us your methodology for that? Where have you seen, I know it can be a numbers game, right? Reach out to 100 people, maybe 2 get back to you, but is there a certain way you do it that people can take some of your advice and try themselves?
Sure, absolutely. I do cold outreach every single day, 7 days a week, 24/7. So I live it. And it's at first quite startling if you're just getting started, because you feel so odd reaching out to someone you don't know. But the best way to do this is let go of the fear of the unknown and just be okay with sending something out into the ether and hoping something will come back. That's step 1. Step 2, really know what it is you're asking someone. Because if you go in with a muddled and confused request, nobody's going to respond to you. So you have to be very clear and express right off the bat why you're reaching out. And then the next thing that you need to express is how you are going to help that person. Because I find that if you are just reaching out being like, give me something, it's not going to work out. That's not how this goes. You have to be expressing how you are going to help that person and why it's beneficial for that person to want to talk to you. I think that's really important, because if you're going to reach out to someone and expect them to respond to you, you need to express the why and the how. So for me, I always position my outreach as, hi, I'm Andi, and here's what I'm doing. And the reason why this is relevant to you is because I'm going to help you do X, Y, and Z. Do you want to work with us? Give us a call. Let's set up some time where I can get on the phone with you and meet you face-to-face over a Zoom or even just an audio and express myself more clearly. And so I think it's incredibly important to not be afraid to pick up the phone or to get on a Zoom and actually meet somebody and prompt the other person to want to meet you. In this digital world, we're very inclined to just hide behind our computer and hide behind our keyboard. But there's so much power in actually introducing yourself and actually talking face to face and forming a real connection, because then when you meet them in person, or if there's an option for you to go out and get a coffee or get a drink or whatever, it's even better because you really need to form a personal connection with the people that you're reaching out to. So my structure is A, get over the fear and just go do it and hit send. B, explain exactly why you're here and how you're going to help. And then always prompt to set up something more personal so that they can really get to know you.
That's great advice. Thank you. Just a couple more quick ones. Do you have a motto you're living by right now, or some kind of thing you go back to? And if so, what is it?
Yes, I do, actually. Have you ever read the book Count of Monte Cristo?
Yes, I've read it a couple times. I love that book.
Awesome. Have you seen the movies?
Think I saw the Leonardo DiCaprio one. That was that story, wasn't it?
I don't know about a Leonardo DiCaprio one.
I don't know. Yeah. Well,
maybe I don't know that one. But there's one with Guy Ritchie, I believe, and it's just it's a really good interpretation of the book, and I absolutely love it. So if people have not read the book, you can definitely go watch the movie. The book is quite meaty, so it's a long one, and there's a lot of French in there, so it's quite challenging. But the quote that I live by is from that story, and it's life is a storm, my young friend. You may be shattered on the rocks one moment or be basking in the sunlight the next, but it's what you do when that storm comes that makes you the person that you are. I haven't directly quoted it, but it's essentially saying there's going to be good times and there's going to be bad times. And in the good times, it's really easy to be your best self. In the bad times, it's really hard to be your best self because you're sad or you're hurt or something has happened to you and it's not favorable. But how you show up, regardless of whether it's good or bad, is what makes you the person that you are. And for me, going on this expedition and moving to Australia and upending my whole life and being told I'm crazy all the time and, all of these things, like for me, I just try to be as positive and optimistic as I possibly can, even in some of the hardest times when that's very, very, very challenging to do, and realize that there's something that I'm trying to achieve and there's something that I put in a lot of work towards, and I'm going to keep pushing no matter what. And my whole thing is to just help people along the way. I might not always get it right. There's no way we always get it right, but we're sure as heck trying, and we're going to stay optimistic even when things don't go our way.
That's a wonderful place to end this. Well, I should ask one more thing, because, I'm a child of the 90s in some ways. So you mentioned 90s grunge earlier. Do you have a go-to 90s grunge song right now?
Oh, man. Right now, yes. Actually, I do. I hope this is what one would classify as 90s grunge, because I certainly do. I have been listening to Dishwalla a lot lately. And what's the song? Chasing Blue Cars. Is that the name? Hold on, let me make sure that's right.
That's not something you hear every day.
Counting Blue Cars. Yes. Dishwalla, Counting Blue Cars. Let's see if the genre is 90s grunge.
Oh,
though.
yeah.
Is that 90s grunge?
That's a classic. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it's, alternative. 90s alternative, let's say.
Yeah, 90s alternative. That's more like it. So I've been listening to a lot of Dishwalla and Counting Blue Cars, to be exact. And yeah, I've been listening to it on repeat, like incessantly. And I don't really know why. I'm just vibing on the song right now.
It's a great song.
It's a great
Because
song.
I'd really like to see him. All right, and something like that anyway. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. It's definitely, okay, I take that back.
It. We're not very far now.
Yeah, exactly. It's not 90s. It's not 90s grunge. It's 90s alternative right now. I will take the grunge part back.
Either way, why don't we link up to that too, and then people can watch the YouTube video if they've never heard of this song. You know, that's the first time I think I've ever heard in my life hear somebody say, "I've been listening to a lot of Dishwalla lately." You know, it's just not something you hear every day.
Weird.
So I appreciate that. But you know, that song ends. They're repeating the line, "We're not very far now," and so it's interesting because you're out on the edges of Earth, as you describe it. We're not very far now. The last sort of 4 lines of that song. I don't know. You know, maybe something going on there with the traveling. And anyway, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate this conversation. I'm really inspired by what you've done and what you've accomplished so far, and how you've been able to kind of figure out a way to infuse all of that into your love of the ocean and travel and everything. Want to remind people edgesoferarth.com is where it's at, and we'll link up to all this in the show notes. Thanks for the destination recommendations and all the inspiration today. I really appreciate your time, Andi, and good luck out there.
Thank you. It was so nice to chat, and maybe we'll reconnect in Philly. We'll get some cheesesteaks.
Would love that. Take care.
Bye.
There you have it. Huge thanks to Andi for getting up at that ungodly hour and recording this podcast for you today. Really appreciate it. Of course, as a reminder, you can check out edgesoferarth.com, and we'll link up to everything in the show notes. And the last takeaway, or the main takeaway I want to share as we close this one out, is, you maybe guessed it, this idea that you can invent the path. You can invent the path. The path doesn't have to be there. You can make it. And I've got an example of this that inspires me daily up in my office. I have a copy of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album sitting right near my desk. And the reason why I have that is because it was, you know, what some say is the first concept album, or at least the first concept album that was sort of maybe mass accepted in a way. Maybe there was a concept album before that. I'm not sure, but this is generally known as the first, if not one of the first concept albums that gained popularity. And that idea of creating a full album of music that all is tied together somehow. And it was a new concept at the time when the record came out. The concept album was a new concept. How many times am I going to say concept in this outro? Anyway, you get the point. It was something that didn't exist that they created. And within that album, because I've read a book about it and the creation of it by the guy that did all of the sound for the album, so many unique experiments, so many different ideas that had never really been done before musically. And that also had to be physically done because at the time, music was recorded in a reel-to-reel tape. And so there were certain things they had to do to actually capture certain sounds they wanted. We don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of it. But when I see this album every day, I think about a lot of different things, I guess, depending on the day. But one of them would be this idea of limitless possibility, or that, you know, we can look at the things we do, or the spaces we're in, the industries, the things we want to go into, the projects we want to create, whatever, as these sort of defined things. And then we got to find our little box, create our little box within that box. And as Andi demonstrated today, there really is no box. You can make your own box that's tied to that thing, but separate from it. And that's what the Beatles did with this record. They, you know, in a way reinvented what an album could be. And I often think, you know, how can I take the sort of the daily things I'm doing? Is there a way to reinvent something or some of these things? It just stretches your creative mind. And I find that empowering. So I wanted to share that as we close this one out. And I'll leave you with a quote from Anatoly France, who said, quote, "If the path be beautiful, let us not ask where it leads." Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.